Hey, it's Lacey Broussard, and this is the Multi-Orgasmic Mama podcast. From sex and motherhood, birth and relationships, communication and intimacy building, and Taoism and Tantra, we explore topics such as self-care, self-pleasure, body image, jade eggs, the feminine cycles, creativity in business, and modern spirituality. The Multi-Orgasmic Mama is a place to come for true stories and transformational advice on how to be a mama and a multi-orgasmic woman too. Hello, mamas. It's Lacey here, and I have a short little story to tell you today. If you don't already know, I live in the South in Louisiana, and I have 2 kids. I had the perfect childhood growing up. My parents stayed together. They hardly ever fought. I mean, they did every now and then, but they made up. We lived in the same house from the day I was born until I left when I was 18. We had a tight-knit community. Everything was super stable. Everything was provided for in every single way. And there's still this one thing that happened that has taken my entire adult life to heal from. And that's the massive amount of guilt and shame around my sexuality that growing up in a conservative Christian community caused me. And yes, it's a total first world problem. I realize that, and I have so little to complain about, really. And really, I'm not complaining, but I do want to discuss how common this is for people that I meet every damn day and how much they unconsciously suffer in their relationships because they can't seem to shake this conditioning. And if there's anything that I went through as a kid and as an adult that I could spare my children from, it's the message that you should feel guilty and ashamed of your sexuality because it's of the flesh and the flesh is somehow sinful. This is freaking crazy shit. I'm so glad that I had the courage to do the work to heal this part of myself, because the thing on the other side of sexual guilt and shame is sexual celebration. And it's freaking amazing to be in a place where I can truly celebrate my sexuality and not be afraid of it. Doing the work to get here has been worth every single fear that I faced, every near anxiety attack that I had when I started doing the real work. The real work meaning that I started doing jade egg practices and having to touch and get to know myself in ways that I wasn't used to or that I was completely terrified of. One quote that's been going around a lot lately that's really struck me says that your wound is probably not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And I couldn't agree more with this, because no matter how ideal or fucked up our childhoods were, we all got wounded somehow. And it wasn't our fault, but we are responsible for healing these wounds. The path of healing and of returning to sexual wholeness and celebration can be terrifying and scary, but I promise it's really not that hard. I get messages from people all the time who long so badly to love their sexuality and their body, but they just can't seem to do it even within a sanctioned container such as marriage. Or maybe they really do have the ideal body, but they can't stop finding things wrong with it. They just don't know how to get past the guilt and shame and really come to a place of ultimate celebration. They want to feel confident and free to express themselves. They wonder why sex isn't as good anymore. They wonder why it feels empty or leaves them feeling depleted. But when they were young, it left them feeling on top of the world. And they wonder what happened to their sexual confidence. Everywhere I go, I encounter people suffering so badly from this, whether it be from their religious upbringing or simply from the cultural narrative that limits our expression of our sexuality. It limits our ability to connect, our ability to feel wild and free. It cuts off our lust for life, our passion, our ecstatic nature, and even our multi-orgasmic potential. This is so sad and depressing to me because sex really is the ultimate celebration of life, yet it's also the most shamed, feared, and guilted thing on the planet. How dare we celebrate sex, right? And because of this limiting belief, we hold ourselves back in the bedroom. We cut ourselves off from the enormous amount of pleasure available to us. And sometimes we even go numb or we feel pain when we would otherwise be experiencing pleasure. How can we create a space to even begin busting through these layers of guilt and shame that keep us from feeling confident, whole, powerful, and sexy in our own skin? I'm going to give you 4 steps to do that right now. The first step to free ourselves from sexual guilt and shame is to question and determine where that belief and conditioning came from. Did it come from religion? For many of you, that's probably the case. Maybe you love your religion, and that's totally okay. But can you question for just a sec whether or not the message to feel guilty and ashamed of your sexuality is truly at the heart of your religion and what your God would want for you? Or did that message get put there by people who had an agenda? I can say with much certainty that any anti-sex and anti-body teachings are ultimately not at the heart of most religions. But those teachings did get put there by very fearful patriarchy who didn't understand women's sexuality and who were fearful of women's sexual power. It got put there by people who wanted to control women and their sexuality. This topic of sexual guilt and shame is probably one of the hottest topics in this modern day because we are just now waking up to how much our lovemaking is affected by this underlying guilt and shame from our social and religious conditioning. When I started diving deep into my own sexual guilt and shame, I wasn't religious at the time, but I was very aware of how much the guilt and shame felt fundamentally wrong, even when I was, like before I was 16. I decided that I didn't want to live another day hating my body or feeling disgusted having sex with the lights on. I didn't want to live one more day feeling guilty about how I expressed myself or how I sounded, or for wanting to masturbate in a certain way, or for wanting to fulfill a certain fantasy, for God's sake. I wanted to be free to express myself and to not feel bad about it. I wanted to explore sex and not feel guilty. One question I encourage you to ask yourself the next time you feel shameful or guilty of your body or sexuality is, who would I get to be in this moment if I wholly accepted my sexuality and my body? Who would I get to be if I didn't let the shame or guilt hold me back? Maybe you get to be a sex goddess or a sex queen, but you've never allowed yourself to be that. Step 2 to overcome sexual guilt and shame so you can feel confident, powerful, and sexy instead is to recognize and identify that you have the guilt and the shame and that it's a part of you. It's so important that as much as possible you come to love, accept, and embrace this part of yourself, because if you reject this part of you, all you're doing is going to war with yourself, and that never helps anything. It actually empowers the guilt and the shame even more. By recognizing it, you can start to pay attention to when it shows up and begin to have a conversation with this part of you that feels guilty and ashamed. You have to come to love this part of you, because loving it will actually help it to feel heard. And when it's heard, it stops talking so much. But you can also set a boundary with this part of you, letting it know that it's not allowed to show up in the bedroom anymore, but that you want your queen sex goddess to show up there instead. The third step is to feel the somatic layer of this guilt and shame. What does that mean? What's the physiological response to the guilt and shame? What do you feel inside of your body when you are aware of the guilt and shame creeping in? Do you feel a tension in your belly? Do you feel a sharpness or a numbness in your pelvis? Do you feel your body contract in any way, and where? You always want to ask yourself, what's underneath this guilt and shame? Where do I feel it in my body? And do I even believe that I should feel guilt and shame in this moment? Always question your truth over the beliefs you are conditioned to. Do you believe that your sexual desires are something you should feel guilty and ashamed of, or is this your conditioning saying that to you? The fourth step to overcome sexual guilt and shame is to find your own truth about the situation, so you can create freedom from the conditioned beliefs that we really unconsciously picked up growing up. You can do this by feeling into the sensation inside of your body when you feel the guilt and shame. And as you breathe into the sensation and sound the sensation out, almost as if the sensation had a sound. It may feel weird to sound a sensation, but that's really how you liberate the guilt and shame inside of the body, through movement and sound. When you breathe into the sensation, use your voice to sound what you feel. And the more that you can liberate by sounding and moving, the more you will release and relax and soften and eventually open up your body to the possibility of connecting with your own truth about how sex should feel. This will soften the conditioning and emotion and let your truth start to emerge instead. You can't get rid of the guilt and shame, but you can soften it and help your body realize that you have a choice in how you want to feel. You can always choose your truth, which might be feeling like a sex goddess or a sex queen instead of feeling guilt and shame. Whatever it is you want to feel instead of guilty and ashamed. When you take these 4 steps of 1, questioning your beliefs, 2, recognizing and identifying that they're even there, 3, feeling where you feel the belief or emotion inside of your body, and 4, moving and sounding during sex with your partner or with yourself, you'll begin to open to what you want to feel in this moment instead. You really do have a choice, but it takes doing it over and over again to connect with your truth and really solidify the quality of your truth inside of your body so it becomes second nature. It's so important to remember that it's not about getting rid of the beliefs or the conditioning about sex being something to be shameful or guilty about, but it's about having another option that's more in alignment with your highest truth instead. Now it's over to you, goddess. Try it out and let me know how it goes. And if you're loving this content, be sure to sign up for weekly updates, and I will send you my 8-step checklist to unlock multi-orgasmic bliss at bit.ly/Lacey's newsletter. That's bit.ly/Lacey's newsletter. No caps, no special marks or anything. If you're looking for one-on-one support to overcoming sexual guilt and shame so you can feel confident, powerful, and sexy instead, I encourage you to check out my Jade Egg shop at lacybroussard.com/jade-egg-shop and get started right now, mama. Talk to you next week.